whose devices had so uniformly failed to entrap me. How far or in what direction I was carried I cannot tell, for the circumstances were all against the formation of any accurate judgment. I know, however, that it could not have been a great distance, since my bearers at no point hastened me on a walk, yet it kept me aloft a surprisingly short time. It is this perplexing brevity which makes me feel almost like shuddering. Whenever I think of Giza and its plateau, for once oppressed by hints of the closeness to everyday tourist routes of what existed then and must exist still, the evil abnormality I speak of did not become manifest at first, setting me down on a surface which I recognized as sand rather than rock. My captors passed a rope around my chest and dragged me a few feet to a ragged opening in the ground, into which they presently lowered me with much rough handling. For apparent eons I bumped against the stony irregular sides of a narrow well, which I took to be one of the numerous burial shafts of the plateau, until the prodigious, almost incredible depth of it robbed me of all basis of conjecture. The horror of the experience deepened with every dragging second. That any descent through the sheer solid rock could be so vast without reaching the core of the planet itself, or that any rope made by man could so long as to dangle me in these unholy and seemingly fathomless profundities of nether earth, were beliefs of such grotesqueness that it was easy to doubt my agitated senses than to accept them. Even now I am uncertain, for I know how deceitful the sense of time becomes when one or more of the usual perceptions or conditions of life is removed or distorted. But I am quite sure that I preserved a logical consciousness that far, that at least I did not add any full-grown phantoms of imagination to a picture hideous enough in its reality, inexplicable by its type of cerebral illusion, vastly short of actual hallucination. All this was not the cause of my first bit of fainting. The shocking ordeal was cumulative, and the beginning of the later terrors was a very perceptible increase in my rate of descent. They were paying out that infinitely long rope very swiftly now, and I scraped down cruelly against the rough and constricted sides of the shaft as I shot madly downward. My clothing was in tatters, and I felt a trickle of blood all over, even above the mounting and excruciating pain. My nostrils, too, were assailed by a scarcely definable menace, a creeping odor of dampness and staleness, curiously unlike anything I had ever smelt before, and having faint overtones of spice and incense that lent an element of mockery. Then the mental cataclysm came. It was horrible, hideous beyond all articulate description, because it was all the soul, with nothing of detail to describe. It was the ecstasy of nightmare and the summation of the fiendish. The suddenness of it was apocalyptic and demoniac. One moment I was plunging agonizingly down that narrow well of a million-toothed torture. Yet the next moment I was soaring on bat wings in the gulfs of hell, swinging free and swooping through illimitable miles of boundless musty space, rising dizzily to measureless pinnacles of chilling ether, then diving gaspingly to sucking naders of ravenous, nauseous lower vacua. Thank God for the mercy that shut out in oblivion those clawing furies of consciousness, which half unhinged my faculties and tore harpy-like at my spirit. That one respite, short as it was, gave me the strength and sanity to endure those still greater sublimations of cosmic panic that lured and gibbered on the road ahead. too. It was very gradually that I regained my senses after that eldritch flight through Stygian space. The process was inevitably, infinitely painful, and colored by fantastic dreams into which my bound and gagged condition found singular embodiment. The precise nature of these dreams was very clear when I was experiencing them, but became blurred in my recollection almost immediately afterward, and it was soon reduced to the merest outline by the terrible events, real or imaginary, which followed. I dreamed that I was in the grasp of a great and horrible paw, a yellow, hairy, five-clawed paw. Which had reached out of the earth to crush and engulf me. And when I stopped to reflect what the paw was, it seemed to me that it was Egypt. In the dream, I looked back at the events of the preceding weeks and saw myself lured and enmeshed little by little, subtly and insidiously, by some hellish ghost spirit of an elder Nile sorcery, some spirit that was in Egypt before ever man was, and that will be when man is no more. I saw the horror and unwholesome antiquity of Egypt. And the grisly alliance it always had with tombs and temples of the dead. I saw phantom processions of priests with the heads of bulls, falcons, cats, and ibises. Phantom processions marching interminably through subterraneous labyrinths and avenues of Titanic. Propylia, beside which a man is a fly, and offering unnameable sacrifices to indescribable gods. Stone colossi marched in endless night and drove herds of grinning and androus sphinxes down to the shores of illimitable stagnant rivers of pitch. And behind it all, I saw the ineffable malignity of primordial necromancy, black and amorphous, and fumbling greedily after me in the darkness to choke out the spirit that had dared to mock it by emulation. In my sleeping brain, there took shape a melodrama of sinister hatred and pursuit, and I saw the black soul of Egypt singling me out and calling me in inaudible whispers, calling and luring me, leading me on with the glitter and glamour of a Saracenic surface, but ever pulling me down to the age-mad catacombs and horrors of its dead and abysmal pharaonic heart. Then the dream faces took on human resemblances, and I saw my god Abdul-Rees in the robes of a king, with the sneer of a sphinx on his features, and I knew that those features were the features of Khephren the Great, who had raised the second pyramid carved over the sphinx's face in the likeness of his own, and built that titanic gateway temple whose myriad corridors the archaeologists think they had dug out of this cryptical sand and the uninformative rock. And I looked at the long, lean, rigid hand of Khephren, the long, lean, rigid hand as I had seen it on the diorite statue in the Cairo Museum, the statue they had found in the terrible Gateway Temple, and wondered that I had not shrieked when I saw it on Abdul-Rees. That hand, it was hideously cold, and it was crushing me. It was the cold and cramping of the sarcophagus, the chill and the constriction of unrememberable Egypt. It was knighted, necropolitan Egypt itself, that yellow pall. And they whisper such things of Kefren. But at this juncture, I began to awake, at least to assume a condition less completely that of sleep than the one just preceding. I recalled the fight atop the pyramid, the treacherous bedouins in their attack, my frightful descent by rope through endless rock tips, and my mad swinging and plunging in the chill void redolent of aromatic putrescence. I perceived that I now lay on a damp rock floor, and that my bonds were still biting into me with unloosened force. It was very cold, and I seemed to detect a faint current of noisome air sweeping across me. The cuts and bruises I received from the jagged sides of the rock shaft were paining me woefully, their soreness enhanced to a stinging or burning acuteness by some pungent quality in the faint draught. And that mere act of rolling over was enough to set my whole frame throbbing with untold agony. As I turned, I felt a tug from above and concluded that the rope whereby I was lowered still reached to the surface. Whether or not the Arabs still held it, I had no idea, nor had I any idea how far within the earth I was. I knew that the darkness around me was wholly or nearly total. Since no ray of moonlight penetrated my blindfold. But I did not trust my senses enough to accept it as evidence of the extreme depth of sensation, of vast duration which had characterized my descent. Knowing at least that I was in a space of considerable extent, reaching from the surface directly above by an opening in the rock, I doubtfully conjectured that my prison was perhaps the very gateway chapel of old Kefren, the temple of the Sphinx. Perhaps some inner corridor which the guides had not shown me during my morning visit, and from which I might easily escape if I could find my way to the barred entrance. It would be a labyrinth of wandering, but no worse than the others out of which I had in the past found my way. The first was to get free of my bonds, gag, and blindfold, and this I knew would be no great task, since subtle experts that these Arabs had tried every known species of fetter upon me during my long and varied career as an expedient of escape, yet had never succeeded in defeating my methods. Then it occurred to me that the Arabs might be ready to meet me and attack me at the entrance, upon any evidence of my probable escape from the binding cords, as would be furnished by any decided agitation of the rope which they probably held. This, of course, was taking for granted that my place of confinement was indeed Kefren's Temple of the Sphinx. The direct opening in the roof, wherever it might lurk, could not be beyond easy reach of the ordinary modern entrance near the Sphinx, if in truth it were any great distance at all in the service, since the total area known to visitors is not at all enormous. I had not noticed any such opening during my daytime pilgrimage, but knew that these things are easily overlooked amid the drifting sands. Thinking these things over as I lay back, bent and bound on the rock floor, I nearly forgot the horrors of the abysmal descent and cavernous swinging which had so lately reduced me to a coma. My present thought was only to outwit the Arabs, and I accordingly determined to work myself free as quickly as possible, avoiding any tug on the descending line which might betray an ineffective or even problematical attempt at freedom. This, however, was more easily determined than effected. The preliminary trials made it clear that little could be accomplished without considerable motion. It did not surprise me when, after one especially energetic struggle, I began to feel the coils of falling rope as they piled up about me and upon me. Obviously, I thought the Bedouins had felt my movements and released their end of the rope, hastening no doubt to the temple's true entrance to lie murderously in wait for me. The prospect was not pleasing, but I had faced worse in my time without flinching, and would not flinch now.